The Galactic Council had gathered in their massive meeting hall, floating high above the planet Sirius 3. It was a place where the most advanced species in the galaxy discussed the fate of entire star systems, making decisions that affected the lives of trillions. The Grand Hall was filled with representatives of different alien races, tall, multi-eyed beings from the Andromeda system, reptilian diplomats from the Alpha Centauri, and sleek, silver-skinned scientists from the Xanthar cluster. The buzz in the air was thick with excitement, as the most anticipated event of the year was about to begin, the Interstellar Challenge. Every year, the Galactic Council held this competition to find the most capable individual to represent the future of the galaxy. The prize was always incredible: a starship, a vast fortune, and sometimes a political alliance. But this year's prize was something even rarer. The king of the Thyran Empire had promised that whoever won would marry his daughter, Princess Ilara, a woman whose beauty and intelligence were the stuff of legends. She was the jewel of the galaxy, and her marriage would solidify the future of any galactic house. The stakes were higher than ever. The greatest minds and warriors from across the galaxy had gathered, each determined to claim victory. They came from species that had been in space for millennia, wielding technologies and abilities far beyond what humans could imagine. It was clear that the competition would be fierce. And yet, standing at the back of the hall was a single human, Elias Carter, a captain in the United Terran Alliance, and the most unlikely of challengers. The moment Carter entered the hall, a wave of quiet laughter rippled through the audience. He was young, barely past his 30s, wearing a worn-out uniform that had seen better days. His face, though handsome, had a certain ruggedness that was far less polished than the sleek ambassadors and dignitaries seated around him. His hair was messy, and his posture was casual, entirely unlike the formal stiffness of his competitors. His hands were rough from years of piloting starships and fighting on distant battlefields. The human looked out of place among the galactic elite, but there he was, standing tall with a determined glint in his eyes. The other competitors eyed him with a mixture of amusement and disdain. The Thyrans, in particular, sneered. They were an ancient and proud species, known for their fierce warriors and unmatched wisdom. A human, one of the Thyran delegates muttered, his voice dripping with condescension. "What a joke. This will be an easy win." Another alien, a tall creature with 4 arms and a smooth, silver face, leaned over to its companion. "He's got no chance. The human race is still so primitive. They'll be lucky if they last more than an hour." Elias ignored the whispers and walked forward with quiet confidence. He had heard the mockery before. Humans were often underestimated by the galaxy's more advanced civilizations. They had only recently made their first real contact with alien species, and many still viewed them as a young and unpolished species, nothing more than a nuisance at best. But Elias knew better. He knew what humans were capable of, and he wasn't about to back down from a challenge. As he approached the center of the hall, a holographic screen flickered to life above him, displaying the rules of the competition. The trials were designed to test every aspect of the competitors: intellect, combatability, leadership, and more. The first trial would take place on Harian 5, a planet notorious for its death maze, a labyrinth filled with deadly traps, hostile creatures, and unpredictable environmental hazards. It was a place where only the best could survive. Elias' heart beat faster as he read the words. He knew that this was no ordinary competition. This was his chance to show the galaxy that humans were capable of greatness. The Council had placed their bet on the strongest, the smartest, and the most experienced beings in the galaxy. They expected the best from each competitor, and they expected nothing less than perfection. But Elias wasn't afraid. He wasn't the strongest, nor was he the most advanced, but he had something that no one else could match: his adaptability, his courage, and his unshakable belief that humans could achieve anything if they set their minds to it. Those qualities had carried him through countless battles and missions, and now they would carry him through this challenge. As the other competitors glared at him, Elias stood tall and locked eyes with them. He wasn't here to play games or win popularity contests. He was here to prove a point. He was here to show the galaxy that humanity, though young and unpolished, could stand shoulder to shoulder with the greatest species in the universe. And maybe, just maybe, he could win the heart of Princess Ilara as well. The first trial took place on the deadly surface of Xerion 5, a barren world known for its harsh landscapes and violent storms. The planet was a labyrinth of towering cliffs, shifting sands, and jagged rocks. It was perfect for testing the mettle of the competitors. The Galactic Council had designed the maze to be nearly impossible, a place where only the strongest and most intelligent could survive. As the competitors prepared to step into the maze, the air was thick with tension. Elias could feel the weight of the stares from the other challengers. They were the galaxy's elite, trained from birth in every form of combat and survival strategy. Some were veterans of war, others were brilliant scientists, and many had technology far beyond anything Earth had. Yet Elias stood there, armed with nothing more than his wits and a simple set of tools. He wasn't naive. He knew the odds were against him. But he also knew that humans had something the other species lacked, an ability to adapt, to think outside the box, and to survive when all hope seemed lost. It was in their DNA. The Council's voice echoed through the air, its tone cold and distant. Competitors, you have 1 hour to enter the maze. The first to reach the center and retrieve the key of Xerion will move on to the next trial. All other competitors are disqualified. The large holographic gate to the maze slowly opened. The other competitors rushed in, eager to prove their superiority. Elias took a deep breath and followed at a much slower pace. He didn't rush into danger without thinking. Every step mattered in a place like this. The first obstacle appeared almost immediately. A massive chasm blocked the path, stretching far wider than any bridge Elias had ever seen. Some of the competitors tried to use their technology to leap across, but the winds on Xerion 5 were unpredictable, and many found themselves blown off course and forced to restart. Others activated energy shields to fly over, only to be struck by sudden lightning storms that turned their shields to ashes. Elias, however, saw a different solution. Looking around the chasm, he spotted several large boulders just barely hanging over the edge. If he could time it right, he could leap from rock to rock, using the terrain to his advantage. The others hadn't thought of this, too focused on using their advanced tech, while Elias was focused on the environment around him. With careful precision, he jumped to the first rock, and then the next. The boulders trembled under his feet, but he kept moving, trusting his instincts. When he finally reached the other side, he was covered in dust, but the smile on his face was one of victory. Meanwhile, the other competitors had struggled. Many had already been eliminated by the deadly traps hidden throughout the maze. Some had fallen into pits disguised as flat ground, while others had been caught in hidden nets, paralyzed by the venomous dart traps. The maze was designed to test every part of a competitor's skill set. It was clear the others had underestimated the difficulty of the trial, relying too much on their technology and brute strength. As Elias advanced deeper into the maze, he came upon another challenge. A series of narrow tunnels filled with poisonous gas. Most of the other competitors had already fallen behind, unable to find a way through the toxic fog. Some tried to use their advanced suits to filter the air, but they were too bulky to move quickly through the tunnels. Elias, however, simply took off his jacket and wrapped it around his face to create a makeshift filter. He used the simple tools he had on hand to stay alive, relying on his adaptability rather than on expensive tech. In the tunnel, he could hear the faint sounds of others ahead of him, but he moved quietly, conserving energy and making sure to stay ahead of the dangerous traps that triggered automatically when someone passed by. His heart raced, but his mind was calm. His human instincts were sharper than he realized. After what felt like an eternity, Elias finally reached a wide-open chamber in the center of the maze. The walls were covered in strange, glowing symbols that seemed to shift and change as he looked at them. At the center of the room was a pedestal with a glowing crystal, a key of Zarian. As he moved toward it, he could hear the sound of footsteps behind him. Two other competitors had arrived, both Zinthar, tall and quick with their 4 arms and silver skin. They were dangerous opponents, skilled in combat and strategy. But Elias wasn't intimidated. The Zinthar's strength was in their physical prowess, but it was their pride that would be their downfall. He noticed that the pedestal was rigged to trigger a powerful defense mechanism when someone tried to take the key. Without hesitation, Elias pulled out his multi-tool, a simple device humans used for repairs and adjustments, and began to disarm the trap. It wasn't high-tech or impressive, but it was effective. The Zinthar, seeing him kneel down and disarm the trap with ease, hesitated. They were used to relying on force, not wit. Elias grinned, taking the key in his hand as the trap disarmed. "I guess you weren't expecting that," he muttered under his breath. As the Zinthar approached, clearly confused and frustrated, Elias turned to them. "You've got strength, but I got something you'll never understand. The will to survive." The two Zinthar exchanged glances, clearly unsettled. They knew Elias was right. Strength could win battles, but intelligence, creativity, and perseverance won wars. And right now, it was those traits that had brought Elias to the heart of the maze, key in hand. The audience watching in the Galactic Council chamber was silent. They couldn't believe it. A human had made it to the center of the maze, had outsmarted their best warriors, and now held the key of Zarian. The impossible had just become possible. As Elias stood in the center of the maze, the key of Zarian glowing in his hand, the distant hum of the Galactic Council's observation equipment buzzed in the background. He felt a rush of triumph, but he couldn't rest yet. The competition was far from over. Above him, high in the Council's viewing chamber, Princess Ilara sat quietly, her regal posture betraying none of the curiosity and admiration she felt. She had been instructed to observe the trials from afar, to ensure that only the worthy reached her father's prize. As the daughter of the Thyran king, she had seen her share of great leaders, mighty warriors, and brilliant strategists. But something about Elias Carter stood out to her in a way she couldn't explain. Her bright eyes, usually cold and calculating, followed his every move. Ilara had been skeptical at first. After all, humans were young and unpolished compared to the ancient civilizations around her. She had heard the whispers of her father's advisors, who scoffed at the idea of a human even entering the competition. A joke, they had said. An easy target, they had mocked. But as the trials continued, Ilara began to notice something unusual in Elias's actions, something that made him different from the others. While the galaxy's best relied on technology, strength, and years of training, Elias seemed to have something else, an uncanny ability to adapt and think outside the box. It wasn't just about surviving the challenges, it was about how he did it. Ilara leaned forward slightly, her fingers lightly resting on the arm of her chair as she observed the holographic projections of the trials. The maze was the first major obstacle, and already she could see how Elias had relied not on brute force, but on his ingenuity. Where others had struggled with the maze's deadly traps, he had used his surroundings to his advantage. The human had crossed chasms with nothing but his bare hands, outwitted poison gas, and avoided deadly pitfalls with a simple yet effective strategy. As the trials wore on, Ilara found herself thinking about the human captain more and more. She had spent her life surrounded by powerful beings, diplomats, and warriors. She had always been told that she should marry a man of equal or greater strength, someone who could ensure the future of the Thyran Empire. But there was something about Elias that intrigued her. He wasn't the strongest, the smartest, or the most advanced, but he was different. What caught her attention wasn't just his ability to survive. It was his values. There was a deep-rooted sense of morality in the way he approached the trials. He didn't cheat or try to gain an advantage by exploiting others. In fact, during the maze trial, she had seen him pause to help another competitor who had fallen into a trap, even though it slowed him down. That was rare, especially in a contest like this, where victory was everything. The Zinthar competitors, by contrast, were quick to step over anyone who stood in their way. They had come to the competition with the mindset of predators, looking for a fight, always seeking an advantage over others. Ilara had seen it in their eyes, their arrogance, their belief that their strength alone would win them the prize. But Elias, he wasn't like that. He believed in fair play, in doing what was right, even if it meant putting himself at risk. And it wasn't just the trial of the maze. In the following trials, she saw more of the same. During the intelligence test, Elias had outsmarted even the brightest minds, cracking an ancient alien code that the other competitors struggled with. In the combat trial, instead of relying on brute strength like the others, he used clever strategies to defeat his opponents. He didn't fight to win. He fought to outthink them. By the time the third trial began, Ilara had become fully invested in Elias's progress. She had never expected to find herself rooting for a human, but now she couldn't help it. He wasn't like the others. There was something about him that made her wonder if he might actually be the one to win her hand, despite the doubts of her father's court. As the trials continued, Ilara found herself in a difficult position. She had spent so long listening to the advice of the Galactic Council, who had insisted that only the most powerful should rule the galaxy. But Elias was showing her something else. He was showing her that strength wasn't always about size, power, or technology. Sometimes strength came from the ability to persevere, to adapt, and to do what was right even when no one was watching. As the final trial approached, Ilara made a decision that she would later wonder if she had been foolish for making, but she couldn't deny what she had seen. She had been raised to believe that the future of the galaxy lay with the strongest, but Elias was showing her something different, something that could change everything. The other competitors were closing in on the final trial, but Ilara had already made up her mind. She wanted to meet the human who had defied all expectations, the human who had proved that there was more to power than just strength. As the holographic images flickered on her display, showing Elias standing tall at the edge of the battlefield, Ilara stood up. It was time to see for herself what the human had to offer. No more watching from a distance, no more doubts. She would meet him, face to face. The final trial was set on the battlefield of Erickson, a moon-sized arena designed to test the combat skills of the competitors. The surface was barren and gray, filled with obstacles, strange energy fields, and areas that fluctuated with gravity. The air buzzed with tension as the Galactic Council watched from their observation deck, eagerly waiting to see who would emerge victorious. Princess Ilara, sitting in the front row, felt her heart race as she knew this trial would be the ultimate test of the competitors' abilities. The trial was simple in its rules. Last one standing wins. But there was a twist. The battle wasn't just about fighting. It was about leadership, ethics, and survival. The arena was rigged with traps and hidden dangers that would force competitors to make decisions. Decisions that could determine their victory or their defeat. Elias stood at the entrance, his hand gripping his weapon tightly. The other competitors, including the Thyran warriors and the Zinthar strategists, were already in position, scanning the battlefield for the best tactical advantages. Elias knew he couldn't win this trial with brute force alone. He was up against some of the best fighters in the galaxy, some of the most dangerous species to ever exist. But what they didn't have was his ability to think quickly, to make the right call in the heat of the moment. As the holographic gate opened, the competitors surged forward, each one rushing toward the center of the arena where weapons, supplies, and cover were located. Elias took a deep breath and held back, watching the others carefully. He needed to be smart, not reckless. The first few minutes of the battle were chaotic. The Zinthar, with their multiple arms and advanced weaponry, tore through the battlefield with their usual brute force. They had the strength, but they lacked flexibility. Elias watched as one of the Zinthar charged into an energy field, only to have the power grid switch on, trapping him in a cage of electric pulses. The Zinthar let out a loud cry of frustration, realizing too late that their recklessness had cost them the match. Elias smiled to himself. His first rule of survival: don't rush in blindly. Patience was key. Then a loud explosion rocked the battlefield as the Thyran warriors engaged in battle. Their massive forms were nearly impossible to miss. They fought with the precision of generals and the strength of titans. One Thyran warrior, Aksar, had been a favorite of the council from the start. He was a fierce fighter, known for his unmatched strength and combat prowess. He immediately spotted Elias in the distance, his eyes narrowing with a predatory gleam. Human. Aksar roared, his voice booming over the comms. Prepare to die. Elias didn't flinch. He knew Aksar would come for him, and he had no intention of making it easy. He quickly scanned the battlefield for any advantage. He spotted a series of rock formations in the distance, perfect for ambush. Instead of facing Aksar head-on, Elias ran toward the rocks, using his speed to get there first. He knew the Thyran warrior was strong, but Elias had a different kind of strength, the strength to use his environment to his advantage. When Aksar charged at him, Elias led him straight into the trap. He ducked behind a rock just as Aksar slammed into it, causing the rocks to shift and fall. The giant warrior stumbled, off balance for just a moment, but that was all Elias needed. With a quick move, he used a flash grenade from his belt to blind Aksar temporarily. The warrior roared in frustration, swinging wildly. But Elias had already moved. He was already thinking 2 steps ahead. Before Aksar could recover, Elias threw a quick series of smoke grenades, disorienting his opponent further. Elias wasn't trying to kill Aksar. He was trying to outsmart him. He knew a direct fight with the Thyran would only end one way, with Elias on the ground. But by using tactics and misdirection, he could level the playing field. Aksar growled, realizing that the human wasn't as easy to defeat as he had assumed. The warrior backed off, knowing he had been outwitted. But Elias wasn't done. The other competitors were still in the game, and the arena was filled with new dangers. Traps, environmental changes, and sudden shifts in gravity added to the complexity of the challenge. He had to keep his head in the game. Then something unexpected happened. As Elias moved toward a new defensive position, he spotted a group of unarmed civilians caught in a deadly energy field. They had been placed there as part of the trial. Innocent bystanders meant to test the competitors' morals. Some of the other competitors, seeing the civilians as nothing more than obstacles, had already begun firing at them, using them as bait to lure others into traps. But Elias wasn't like the others. He could have easily taken advantage of the situation, used the civilians' distraction to win the trial. But as he looked at their terrified faces, he knew he couldn't do that. He made a snap decision. Without hesitation, Elias sprinted toward the civilians, dodging incoming fire from the other competitors. He reached the energy field and quickly assessed the situation. The field's power core was vulnerable to a quick electrical pulse. Without thinking twice, he used a tool from his belt to overload the energy core, short-circuiting the field and freeing the civilians. As he led them to safety, Elias looked up and saw the stunned faces of the other competitors. They had been too focused on winning at any cost to even think about saving innocent lives. Elias knew this move could cost him the game, but it was the right thing to do. He was playing for more than just victory. He was playing for what he believed in. Princess Ilara watched the scene unfold, her eyes wide in disbelief. The council had warned her that humanity was unrefined and too emotional. But what she was seeing now wasn't weakness, it was strength. Elias wasn't just fighting for his own glory, he was fighting for something greater. As the trial continued, Ilara's heart raced. She had seen enough. The galaxy's strongest didn't always win by force. Sometimes it was the heart that made all the difference. The battle on Erixon was nearing its climax. Elias had outsmarted many of his competitors, but the final moments of the trial were proving to be even more intense than he had anticipated. He was exhausted, but his resolve remained unshaken. The other competitors, however, were beginning to show signs of desperation. After rescuing the civilians, Elias had become a target. The other competitors, furious that he had disrupted their plans, now saw him as the biggest threat in the arena. Axar, the Thyran warrior, had recovered from his earlier defeat and was hunting him down with relentless fury. The Zinthar strategists, known for their tactical brilliance, were closing in as well, circling the battlefield, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Elias knew it wouldn't be long before they all came for him. He was one man against some of the galaxy's most powerful warriors, but he had done something the others had not. He had made an impact. He had shown that he wasn't just a fighter. He was someone who could lead, someone who could think beyond the immediate battle and consider the greater good. As the arena continued to shift, the gravity fluctuating between light and heavy, Elias ducked behind a crumbled wall, catching his breath. He could feel the eyes of the council upon him. Princess Ilara, seated in the observation chamber, was no longer a distant figure. He could sense her gaze, a quiet yet powerful presence that lingered on him. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps behind him snapped Elias out of his thoughts. He spun around, his hand instinctively reaching for his weapon. To his surprise, it wasn't Axar or the Zinthar. It was one of the civilians he had saved earlier. The young woman, no more than 20, had somehow slipped away from the safe zone and was now standing before him, her eyes wide with fear, but also something else, determination. "Why are you here?" Elias asked, his voice low. He didn't have time to explain, and he certainly didn't want to risk more lives being caught in the crossfire. I can help you," the woman said, her voice trembling but firm. "I know this place. I know the traps and the hidden areas. I can get you through." Elias blinked in confusion. "What? You're not trained for this. You'll get yourself killed." The woman shook her head, her hands clenched into fists. "I've been watching the competitors. I know how they move. I know the weak spots. You've saved me. I can help you now." For a moment, Elias hesitated. It was dangerous. It was madness. But then again, he had never been one to let a little danger stop him. And he could see the fire in her eyes. She wasn't just some scared civilian. She was someone who wanted to fight. "Fine," Elias said, his decision made. "But you need to stay close. And don't make a sound unless I say so." The woman nodded, her expression hardening with resolve. "I understand." Together, they moved swiftly through the shadows of the arena, avoiding the prying eyes of the other competitors. Elias had made a dangerous gamble, relying on someone who had never fought in a trial like this. But as they moved through the terrain, he began to see the value in her assistance. She knew things, secret paths, hidden caves, and areas of the arena that even he hadn't noticed. The Zinthar warriors were close now, too close. Elias could hear their mechanical voices in the distance, their coordinated efforts searching for him. They would be relentless, methodical, and unforgiving. But Elias had something they didn't: an ally. The woman led him through a narrow opening in the rock, just as the Zinthar passed by. Elias held his breath, pressing himself flat against the wall as the enemy moved past. He could feel the heat of their presence, hear their footfalls, but he remained still, knowing that a single movement could give them away. Once they were clear, Elias exhaled, a small grin appearing on his face. "You've got good instincts. Where did you learn all this?" The woman shrugged, her gaze moving ahead. "I was born on Erickson. My family used to work in the arena, studying the terrain. I learned how to survive." Elias was silent for a moment. Erickson wasn't known for its welcoming environment. It was a planet designed for combat and testing, not a place most would call home. The woman's survival instinct made more sense now. "You saved my life," she continued, her voice quiet. "Now it's my turn to help you." Elias nodded, his respect for her growing. But the situation was still dire. The battle wasn't over, and the arena was full of danger. But for the first time in the trial, Elias didn't feel alone. He had an ally, someone who had nothing to gain but was willing to risk everything to help him. They moved toward the center of the arena, where the final challenge would take place. The energy in the air was palpable, the countdown to the end of the trial ticking down, and Elias knew that the others were gathering for one final clash. But he wasn't going to fight alone. Not anymore. As they crept closer, Elias could see the massive form of Axar standing in the distance, watching the path he was taking. The Thyren warrior was waiting, ready for the final showdown. But Elias was ready too. He had learned long ago that survival wasn't just about being stronger or faster. It was about making the right choice at the right time. And now, with his new ally by his side, Elias was prepared to face whatever came next. Together, they could take on anything. The final moments of the trial were upon them. Elias and his ally, the young woman who had risked everything to help him, stood on the edge of the battlefield. The air was thick with tension, the ground beneath their feet shifting as gravity fluctuated once again. All around them, the sounds of combat echoed, shouts, weapons clashing, and the hum of energy fields shifting. The final trial was about to begin, and Elias knew this would be the most dangerous part of the competition. Axar, the Thyren warrior, was waiting for him. He could feel the massive warrior's eyes on him, even though he couldn't see him yet. The Thyren had been watching, waiting for this moment. Elias had outsmarted him in the earlier rounds, but now it would come down to raw strength and determination. "You've done well, human," a deep voice rumbled. It was Axar's voice, booming and filled with menace. But this is where it ends. Elias stood tall, trying to ignore the pounding of his heart. The young woman, who had introduced herself as Kira, stood at his side. She was focused, every muscle in her body ready for whatever came next. She had become a true ally, someone he could trust, someone who had proven herself in the heat of battle. "You don't have to fight," Elias said quietly to her. "Get to safety. I'll handle Axar." Kira shook her head firmly. "I'm not leaving. You've already saved me once. Now, it's my turn to help you." Elias smiled, grateful for her courage. "Then stay close." Together, they moved toward the center of the arena, where the final battle would unfold. The other competitors, already battered and bloodied, had retreated to their corners, leaving Axar as the last major obstacle. Elias could feel the eyes of the Galactic Council watching from their high perch. Princess Ilara's gaze was more intense than ever, though she had not spoken since the start of the final trial. What was she thinking? Did she now see him as a true competitor? Did she see him as someone worthy of her kingdom? There was no time for questions. The arena was about to become a battlefield. Axar was waiting, his massive form standing in the center of the open space. His eyes locked onto Elias as he took a step forward. The Zinthar strategists, who had once been a threat, were now nowhere to be seen, likely eliminated in earlier skirmishes. But the real challenge remained. The Thyren warrior, who was known throughout the galaxy for his strength and ruthlessness. "You are brave, human," Axar said, his voice dripping with disdain. "But you are not strong enough to win this." Elias didn't answer. Instead, he scanned the area, looking for any advantage, any opportunity to outwit his opponent. He had learned in the previous trials that his greatest weapon wasn't his strength, it was his mind. He would need to use everything he had learned to defeat Axar. The battle began in a blur of movement. Axar charged first, his fists like massive hammers, aimed straight for Elias. The ground beneath them shook with the force of the impact as Elias barely dodged the punch, rolling to the side just in time. The Thyren warrior's sheer power was overwhelming, but Elias had always been quick on his feet. Kira shouted from behind him, "Move to your left. There's a gap in his defense." Elias didn't hesitate. He darted to the left, just as Axar swung another devastating punch. The Thyren warrior's fist smashed into the ground, sending rocks flying into the air. It was a lucky break, and Elias took it. He leaped forward, using his smaller size to his advantage, and landed a quick strike to Axar's side. But Axar barely flinched. The warrior grinned, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "You are quick, but that will not save you." Elias backed away, carefully circling the larger fighter. He needed to wear Axar down, get him to make a mistake. But Axar wasn't just strong. He was also smart. He adjusted his stance, making it harder for Elias to get in close. The battle was turning into a test of endurance. Elias was faster, more agile, but Axar was stronger. Each time Elias managed to land a blow, Axar would respond with a powerful counter, nearly knocking him off his feet. "You can't win this." Axar snarled, swinging his massive fist again. "You're just a human." Elias gritted his teeth. The words stung, but they also lit a fire in him. He was human. That's what made him different from everyone else in the arena. It wasn't just about the fight. It was about proving that strength didn't come only from size, or power, or weapons. It came from the heart. Suddenly, a realization hit Elias. He wasn't alone. Kira was behind him, watching, waiting for the right moment. She had already helped him get this far. She was more than just an ally. She was a partner in this fight. If they worked together, they might just have a chance. Elias grinned. "You're right about one thing, Axar," he said, his voice steady. "I'm not strong enough to win this fight alone." Before Axar could react, Elias signaled Kira. Without hesitation, she sprinted forward, drawing the attention of the Thyran warrior. Axar turned to face her, just for a moment, and that was all Elias needed. With a burst of speed, he leaped forward, aiming for Axar's exposed side. This time, the strike was more than just a hit. It was a calculated move, using the distraction to land a decisive blow. The Thyran warrior staggered, the impact knocking him off balance. For the first time, Axar's confident grin faltered. "You!" Axar growled, struggling to regain his footing. Elias stepped back, breathing hard but smiling. "It's not just about strength, Axar. It's about heart. And we've got that." As Axar stumbled, trying to regain his balance, Elias and Kira stood side by side, ready for whatever came next. The battle was far from over, but now Elias knew that he wasn't alone. He had the strength of his heart, and that was more than enough. The final moments of the trial had arrived. The arena was silent, save for the faint hum of the energy fields that surrounded it. Elias stood, his chest rising and falling as he caught his breath. Axar, the mighty Thyran warrior, was struggling to get back on his feet. His massive form was staggering, his once unshakable confidence now cracked. For the first time in this brutal trial, the Thyran warrior was unsure. Elias and Kira stood together, both battered but resolute. The final battle had been long, exhausting, and dangerous. They had faced overwhelming odds, but they were still standing. Elias had learned in these moments that it wasn't just about surviving. It was about who you chose to be when the fight seemed impossible. Axar let out a frustrated roar, his voice shaking the very ground beneath them. "This is not over, human," he bellowed. "You will fall. You have no place in the galaxy." But Elias was different from all the competitors Axar had faced before. Elias wasn't just fighting for personal glory. He wasn't even fighting for the recognition of the Galactic Council. He was fighting for something far greater. His will to survive wasn't rooted in pride. It was rooted in a deep, undeniable belief that humans could overcome anything. "You're wrong, Axar," Elias said, his voice steady and clear. "Humans have always fought to protect what matters. We fight for each other, for our homes, and for what we believe in." Kira stood beside him, her eyes locked on Axar. She had been there every step of the way. And now together, they were going to finish this. Axar's eyes narrowed. He was clearly seething with rage, but something in his posture had changed. He wasn't the unbreakable warrior he had been at the start. Elias's words had struck a chord. The Thiran was starting to realize that Elias wasn't the simple human he had expected. Axar charged again, his fists raised. The ground shook beneath him, and the air crackled with the force of his movements. But Elias wasn't afraid. He had been waiting for this. He knew the Thiran's strength was his biggest weapon, but it was also his biggest weakness. Axar relied too much on brute force, and that made him predictable. As Axar came closer, Elias gave a quick signal to Kira. With swift precision, she darted to the side, drawing Axar's attention away from Elias. The Thiran warrior turned just in time to see Kira launching a surprise attack. She wasn't as strong as he was, but she was quick, landing a few well-placed blows to his midsection. Axar roared in anger, but this was the opening Elias had been waiting for. As Axar swung wildly at Kira, Elias dashed forward, using his agility to avoid the strike. With a powerful kick, he sent Axar stumbling backward, and in that moment, Elias saw his chance. He wasn't going to defeat Axar with strength alone, but he could defeat him with strategy. Elias darted behind the massive warrior, using his momentum to propel him forward and land a decisive strike to Axar's back. The blow wasn't enough to take the Thiran down completely, but it caused him to stagger and lose his balance, finally giving Elias the opening he needed. Axar fell to his knees, his breathing ragged. He was no longer the unstoppable force he had once been. Elias stood over him, his chest heaving with exhaustion. The battle was over, but the trial wasn't finished. Elias looked down at Axar, his expression hardening. This trial was never about proving who is strongest. It was about proving who we are. Axar glared at him, but Elias didn't back down. The Thiran's pride had been shattered, but Elias had won the battle of wills. He had done it not through sheer strength, but through his heart, his mind, and his determination to show the galaxy what humanity could achieve. The hum of the energy fields around them shifted, signaling the end of the trial. The arena began to glow with a soft, golden light as the council's voice rang out, booming across the vast space. The trial has ended. The winner is Elias of Earth. For a moment, Elias just stood there, absorbing the weight of the victory. The cheering of the crowd echoed through the arena, but he barely heard it. He was too focused on what had just happened, on the journey that had brought him here. He had fought through every challenge, every trial, and he had proven himself worthy, not just to the Galactic Council, but to himself. He turned to Kira, who was smiling brightly. She had stood by him through it all. Without her help, he knew he wouldn't have made it this far. Together, they had become more than allies. They had become a team. Elias reached out, his hand resting on her shoulder. "We did it." Kira nodded, her eyes shining with pride. "We sure did." As they made their way to the center of the arena, where the council awaited, Elias couldn't help but think about the future. He had won the trial, but now he had a bigger decision to make. The Galactic Council had promised him a prize, but what did he want? Power? Wealth? Fame? He looked up at the towering figures of the council, their eyes fixed on him. They had underestimated him from the start, but now they saw him as a force to be reckoned with. Elias knew what he wanted. "I don't want power or wealth," Elias said, his voice strong. "I want to create a future where humanity isn't just seen as another species. I want to show the galaxy that we can contribute, that we can lead, and that we can make a difference." The council was silent for a moment. Then, Princess Ilaris stood up, her gaze intense as she looked at Elias. "You've proven your worth, Elias of Earth," she said. "The galaxy will listen, and we will follow your lead." For the first time, Elias felt the full weight of the responsibility he had just accepted, but it didn't scare him. It motivated him. He had come a long way, and now, humanity would have its place in the galaxy, not as outsiders, but as leaders.